April 18, 1942. Dawn has yet to pierce the horizon over the Pacific, but the air is already thick with humidity and the faint tang of salt. The deck of the USS Hornet rocks gently beneath the rhythm of the waves, each movement precise, measured. Men move with quiet efficiency, hauling crates of bombs, fuel cans, and parachutes, the lifeblood of an operation that history has yet to recognize. Engines hum in the distance, restrained, almost imperceptible, blending with the soft slap of water against steel. Every footstep echoes in the early morning stillness. Sweat beads along foreheads despite the chill of pre-dawn wind. Sailors whisper numbers, check instruments, adjust rigging, small motions, small sounds, carrying a weight far heavier than themselves. Somewhere beyond the hull, planes rest in neat rows, their wings brushing against each other, silent but lethal. On board, no one speaks of the eyes watching from Tokyo. Japanese intelligence has declared this flotilla irrelevant, a force without supply lines, incapable of lasting more than a single sortie. They believe the Americans are fragile, stranded, predictable. They do not see what is being carried here: meticulous planning, fuel caches, precise timing. The hum of readiness vibrates through the deck, unnoticed by those across thousands of miles, who assume failure is inevitable. The sun begins to touch the horizon, a pale line of light over endless ocean. Every man on the Hornet senses a tension that cannot be measured, the invisible pressure of history preparing to pivot. Second stretch. Decisions unmade weigh as heavily as steel. History is about to be shocked. April 1942. The Pacific War is only 4 months old, but it has already redefined the limits of naval power. Japan dominates the Western Pacific, its fleets radiating outward from a network of recently captured islands. Manila has fallen. Singapore lies under occupation. Dutch East Indies oil fields are feeding the Japanese war machine. Japanese intelligence, confident in their meticulous planning, has concluded that the United States Navy is on the defensive, weakened by Pearl Harbor, and incapable of sustaining operations beyond its home bases. Tokyo's assessments are precise, almost clinical. Reports from spies, intercepted communications, and signal intelligence have convinced the Imperial General Headquarters that American forces lack the logistical depth to project power. Supply chains, in Japanese thinking, are fragile, too slow, too vulnerable, too overstretched. The calculations are simple. Without resupply points scattered across the Pacific, any American strike will be short-lived, isolated, and easily contained. The Japanese military believes itself invincible at sea, its fleets supported by captured resources, fortified bases, and a disciplined doctrine of decisive engagement. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the United States is reorganizing. The shock of Pearl Harbor has forced a re-evaluation of assumptions. Admiral Ernest J. King, Chief of Naval Operations, emphasizes mobility, redundancy, and improvisation. Ships are refitted. Carriers are prepared for extended sorties, and crews drill relentlessly on the coordination of fuel, armaments, and aircraft. The Hornet, commissioned less than a year prior, has been configured for rapid strike operations. Crates of high-explosive bombs, fuel drums, and parachutes are loaded with precision, each item accounted for, each movement calculated against time and tide. The Americans do not have extensive forward bases, but they have logistical ingenuity, a capacity to make supply lines work over thousands of miles of open ocean. The context is one of sharp contrast. Japanese intelligence sees rigid, exposed Americans. U.S. planners know they are vulnerable, but they exploit that vulnerability with preparation and stealth. American doctrine favors flexibility, fast carriers, careful refueling, and the use of auxiliary ships and cargo vessels to extend operational reach. Every crate carried, every gallon of fuel pumped, every bomb hoisted onto a plane has been calculated to the last ounce. Japanese confidence underestimates the human and mechanical machinery required to sustain such operations, but they will soon witness the consequences. Political pressures weigh heavily on both sides. Japan is consolidating its empire, securing raw materials to fuel further conquest. A symbolic strike against the U.S., even one that cannot change the balance of power, would reinforce morale, intimidate the American public, and demonstrate Japanese supremacy. For Washington, morale is fragile. Roosevelt's administration is determined to show that the United States can retaliate, not through overwhelming force, but through daring, precise action. Logistics, timing, and the ability to strike far from home are the tools that will level a battlefield advantage that Tokyo assumes is permanent. By early April, all calculations converge. Japanese intelligence, reviewing aerial reconnaissance and intercepted radio chatter, assumes that any American raid must be local, opportunistic, and easily countered. The notion of an aircraft carrier launching a raid directly on the Japanese home islands, fully supplied and ready for a round trip, is dismissed as fantasy. Across thousands of miles of ocean, the Hornet and her sister ships prepare quietly, invisibly, carrying the means to challenge that assumption. The stage is set, an American fleet underestimated by Japanese eyes, moving under the radar of expectation. Every crate, every fuel line, every pilot's checklist is a challenge to the intelligence assessments of Tokyo. The operation is not just a strike. It is a logistical ballet executed on open water, where the slightest miscalculation could doom the endeavor. Across the Pacific, the Japanese believe failure is inevitable. The Americans know only that the success of the mission depends on precision, timing, and the unseen power of supply lines that Japan refuses to believe exist. By mid-April 1942, the Pacific Ocean stretches as a vast, unbroken expanse of blue, indifferent to the war raging above its surface. For Japanese intelligence, this ocean is a barrier that Americans cannot overcome. Fuel is scarce, repair facilities are distant, and forward bases are non-existent. The assumption is simple: American carriers cannot operate effectively beyond Hawaii or the Aleutians. Each mile from Pearl Harbor is a mile closer to disaster. Supply lines, they conclude, are non-existent. But American planners see the ocean differently. The Hornet and Enterprise, fast carriers equipped with deck planes capable of long-range sorties, are supported by a carefully orchestrated network of supply vessels, oilers, cargo ships, and auxiliary cruisers, moving silently in open water. Every element has been timed, rehearsed, and counted. The coordination is immense. Fuel must be transferred at sea, bombs loaded onto aircraft in precise order, maintenance crews prepared to repair engines mid-transit. Failure of even a single element could doom the mission. Yet the Americans embrace this complexity, understanding that success lies not in brute force, but in disciplined execution. The logistical challenge is compounded by geography and enemy observation. The Pacific is vast, and the carriers must traverse thousands of miles, often within sight of Japanese reconnaissance aircraft and patrol ships. Timing is critical. A miscalculation in fuel consumption, in weather prediction, or in aircraft readiness could leave the fleet stranded hundreds of miles from friendly ports. Every sailor, every pilot, every deck officer is acutely aware that even minor delays can cascade into operational catastrophe. Japanese expectations are shaped by doctrine and prior victories. The Imperial Navy excels at decisive, concentrated engagements near its bases. They have mastered the coordination of multiple fleets, air cover, and logistics in occupied territories. Yet this doctrine has a blind spot. It underestimates the capacity for improvisation and forward-thinking supply management. To Tokyo, Americans are reactive, constrained, unable to sustain an offensive thousands of miles from home. They do not anticipate meticulous prepositioning, auxiliary support ships shadowing the carriers, or the careful rationing of fuel and ordnance to extend operational reach. The operational environment adds another layer of tension. April brings seasonal changes in the Pacific, unpredictable squalls, shifting winds, and the threat of typhoons. Each factor influences fuel burn, flight operations, and navigational accuracy. Japanese intelligence expects that environmental hazards will further limit American capability. Their reports note the difficulty of operating far from land, emphasizing distance and exposure as natural barriers to success. Yet American planners have built contingency into every calculation. Weather forecasts, ocean currents, and tidal data have been analyzed, integrated into navigation charts, and drilled repeatedly. The fleet moves like a living organism, each component anticipating the next. Finally, the human element defines the operation. Every sailor understands the peril and the audacity of the mission. Fuel officers measure quantities to the liter. Pilots check altimeters, engine temperatures, and load balance multiple times before takeoff. Deck crews perform synchronized maneuvers to move hundreds of tons of bombs without delay or accident. The sheer scale of coordination is invisible to Japanese eyes, and that invisibility is the key to success. To Tokyo, the Americans are exposed and overextended. In reality, every vulnerability has been calculated, every risk mitigated, and every movement rehearsed. The contrast could not be starker. Japanese intelligence, relying on incomplete reconnaissance, rigid doctrine, and assumptions born from early victories, sees a fleet incapable of projecting power. The Americans, constrained but precise, see opportunity. Supply lines are not absent. They are hidden in plain sight, supported by innovation, timing, and a willingness to accept risk where Japanese planners assume none could be taken. As April progresses, the fleet converges toward the launch point. Every sailor senses a tension, a silent acknowledgement that this operation exists in a zone of improbability. Success requires nothing less than perfect execution against expectations that are overwhelmingly against them. Every crate of ordnance, every gallon of fuel, every carefully charted mile of ocean is a step toward disproving Japanese assumptions, a quiet preparation for a strike that will shock intelligence reports thousands of miles away. In Tokyo, confidence remains unshaken. Japanese planners do not anticipate what is already in motion across the Pacific. And yet, within weeks, that confidence will collide with precision, timing, and the hidden machinery of American supply, proving that logistics, often invisible and underestimated, can decide battles before the first shot is fired. Human cost. April 1942 is not a theater of abstract strategy. It is a crucible of human endurance. Sailors aboard the Hornet, Enterprise, and their supporting vessels face days and nights in close quarters, the heat of the tropics pressing through uniforms and metal decks. Sleep is stolen in shifts, measured in hours, sometimes minutes, as men balance the need for rest with the relentless demand of readiness. Fuel drums are rolled across slick decks. Bombs are lifted by hand and hoisted into racks with precision that tolerates no error. Mistakes carry fatal consequences. Every crew member is aware that a single misstep could ignite an inferno. The roar of engines, the clatter of chains, and the hiss of steam are constant companions. Fatigue strains muscles and nerves alike. Yet morale is sustained by focus, the knowledge that failure is not an option, and that success, if achieved, will reverberate far beyond the Pacific waves. Human resilience becomes as crucial as firepower. Every hand on deck is part of a machine that must operate flawlessly, where one man's lapse can imperil hundreds. Tactical reality. The tactical environment is unforgiving. Launching aircraft thousands of miles from home requires mastery of timing and formation. Carriers must maintain speed and heading with precision to ensure planes meet refueling and rendezvous points on schedule. Japanese patrols, reconnaissance flights, and occasional surface ships create a zone of constant threat. The slightest navigational error or miscalculation in timing could expose the fleet, potentially ending the operation before it begins. Deck crews work under constraints dictated by the physics of flight and the limits of the vessels themselves. Aircraft are pushed to maximum range. Fuel calculations are exact to the gallon. Bombs are loaded for weight distribution, altering the center of gravity. Every maneuver is choreographed to optimize speed and efficiency while minimizing risk. The operation depends on coordination across multiple ships and hundreds of men, a tactical ballet executed in silence under the eyes of an enemy that does not yet recognize the danger. Technological limitations. Even as men move with precision, technology defines the ceiling of possibility. Aircraft engines of 1942 are temperamental, prone to overheating, and sensitive to load and altitude. Radios are limited in range and reliability. Deck equipment for moving bombs, fuel, and munitions is rudimentary by modern standards. Cranes, pulleys, and manual winches, each demanding skill and caution. A single mechanical failure can cascade into operational disaster. Fuel storage is another constraint. Carriers can only hold so much. Fuel transfer between ships is a delicate operation, influenced by sea state, wind, and timing. Weather further complicates matters. Tropical squalls can appear with little warning, forcing pilots to navigate low visibility and deck crews to adjust or halt operations entirely. Maintenance teams work in these conditions, repairing engines, adjusting armaments, and ensuring that aircraft can take off under full load. Yet limitations also breed innovation. The Americans improvise where technology falls short, using manual coordination, careful planning, and redundancy to ensure continuity. Bombs are double-checked, fuel lines monitored, and every launch rehearsed to account for mechanical failure. Japanese intelligence sees only the surface, a carrier fleet far from home, apparently exposed. They do not see the mechanisms, human and mechanical, that allow this fleet to operate where conventional doctrine deems it impossible. These three angles illustrate the invisible forces that underpin operational success: the human endurance that sustains the machine, the tactical precision that navigates threat, and the technological limitations that are mitigated through ingenuity. Together, they reveal a reality far more complex than Japanese intelligence reports suggest. Leadership decisions. Command at Sea in April 1942 is an exercise in precision, foresight, and calculated risk. Admiral Halsey, Admiral Mitcher, and other senior officers coordinate movements with an awareness that a single misjudgment could compromise the entire operation. Orders are concise, drilled into staff officers who translate them into action across decks and across miles of open ocean. Each decision is grounded in verification: fuel calculations, aircraft readiness, crew fatigue, and even tidal forecasts. Leadership here is both strategic and granular. It extends from the admiral on the bridge to the flight deck officer ensuring bombs are hoisted safely, from the navigator charting courses to the fuel officer calculating consumption to the last gallon. Decisions are made under incomplete information. The fleet cannot know exactly where Japanese patrols will appear, nor can it anticipate sudden squalls. Yet leaders operate with disciplined confidence, relying on rehearsed procedures and contingency planning. Every choice carries the weight of thousands of lives, every instruction a step toward either success or catastrophic failure. Enemy miscalculations. Across thousands of miles, Japanese intelligence has made critical miscalculations. Analysts assume the Americans lack supply lines, cannot sustain a sortie over the Pacific, and are constrained by distance. Patrol patterns are predicted with confidence, and any possible American strike is deemed local, opportunistic, and easily contained. This underestimation is rooted in prior victories and an over-reliance on doctrine emphasizing proximity and concentration of force. The miscalculation extends to the perception of morale and coordination. Japanese reports note the exhaustion and vulnerability of U.S. forces post-Pearl Harbor, assuming that fatigue and limited resources will compromise operational effectiveness. What Tokyo does not see is the meticulous planning, redundancy, and improvisation that allow the Americans to overcome these limitations. The fleet's endurance, its capacity to synchronize long-range logistics with tactical precision, is invisible in intelligence reports, creating a blind spot that will soon have profound consequences. Psychological strain. The human mind is tested in equal measure. Sailors and pilots are aware of the stakes. Failure is immediate, visible, and potentially fatal. Anxiety permeates the deck as crews monitor fuel lines, check ordnance, and maintain aircraft ready for launch. Sleep is irregular. Every shift is punctuated by the fear of missteps, of mechanical failure, or sudden enemy contact. Stress is compounded by the silence of expectation. No shots fired yet, but the pressure of the imminent strike presses on every shoulder. Pilots carry additional mental weight. They are tasked with missions that demand precision over thousands of miles, often navigating hostile territory with limited intelligence and zero margin for error. Deck crews, aware of their indirect but vital role, shoulder responsibility for aircraft, bombs, and fuel. Even minor errors could cascade, creating a chain reaction of failure. The strain is invisible to those observing from afar, but it shapes every motion, every decision, and every breath aboard the carriers. Japanese crews, in contrast, operate under the assumption that Americans are constrained and exposed. Their confidence creates a different kind of psychological strain, one of expectation and potential surprise. By underestimating the operational depth of the U.S. fleet, they prepare for a confrontation that does not yet exist, leaving them vulnerable to the audacity of American planning. April 18, 1942. 8 o'clock hours. The Pacific is a vast mirror of blue and gray, stretching unbroken to the horizon. The USS Hornet and USS Enterprise have converged in strict formation, their wakes slicing through calm seas as the carriers maintain 30 knots, engines humming at sustained rhythm. Sailors move silently on deck, checking instruments, monitoring fuel, and readying aircraft for launch. Every motion is rehearsed, every second accounted for. At precisely 8:15, the first of 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers begins to taxi toward the Hornet's flight deck. Pilots, clad in early flight suits and leather helmets, grip controls tightly, eyes scanning the horizon, listening to the creak of landing gear and the hiss of hydraulics. Deck crews release restraints. Bomb racks, previously hoisted and secured, are double-checked. Fuel lines drip under careful supervision, every drop vital. Simultaneously, Admiral Halsey observes from the bridge. Communications officers confirm the positions of each aircraft. Timing is critical. Planes must reach their rendezvous points over Japan at scheduled intervals to maintain surprise and reduce exposure to interception. On auxiliary vessels, crews maintain station, ready to refuel or respond to emergencies, though all hope that such contingencies remain unnecessary. 8:35, the first B-25 lifts off. Its wheels skid briefly across the deck before leaving the carrier, engines roaring, propellers slicing the salty air. Sailors breathe in unison, watching the plane ascend, then track it with binoculars until it is a speck against the Pacific sky. One by one, the remaining 15 bombers follow, each taking off at precise intervals to maintain formation. The air vibrates with energy, a rhythm of readiness meeting action. Meanwhile, Japanese reconnaissance remains unaware. Their aircraft, patrolling thousands of miles from Tokyo, have not detected the American fleet. Signal intercepts indicate nothing unusual. Intelligence officers, confident in their assumptions about American supply limitations, have not anticipated a raid launched from carriers positioned over 600 nautical miles from the nearest Japanese base. In Tokyo, officers continue planning defensive measures for localized attacks, unaware that the Americans are already airborne and en route. 9:20. Over the carrier decks, the final checks are complete. Bombers stabilize, altitude confirmed, radio signals exchanged. Fuel gauges are monitored constantly, engine temperatures read. Pilots adjust trim, confirm flight paths, and note expected rendezvous points. Each second represents the margin between mission success and failure. A minor error here, miscalculated fuel burn, delayed takeoff, or mechanical fault, could force planes to return or ditch in open ocean. On the Japanese home islands, early morning routines continue. Civilians and military personnel alike are unaware of the approaching strike. Fighter squadrons are dispersed across airfields. Radar coverage is minimal and largely focused on defending against threats from expected directions. The Americans are invisible until the moment they will not be. 9:45. The first B-25s cross into Japanese-controlled airspace. Pilots maintain formation, engines straining against distance and wind. Visibility is good, but tension is high. Every shadow on the water, every glint of metal on the horizon, is a potential threat. The navigational charts, studied repeatedly in the weeks prior, guide them across 1,000 miles of ocean, relying on dead reckoning, timing, and skill honed through intensive rehearsal. 10:05. From the Hornet, officers track the mission's progress via radio reports. Relief is tempered by focus. Communication is intermittent to maintain surprise, and each pilot carries responsibility for thousands of miles of ocean between them and home. The fleet, still in open water, maintains readiness, engines humming, aircraft decks clear for potential recovery, though no immediate threat has materialized. The first sighting of Japanese ships occurs far from the carriers. Patrol vessels spot the approaching B-25s, but misidentify them initially as routine reconnaissance aircraft. Orders to engage are delayed. By the time Japanese fighter units scramble, the bombers are already within striking distance of their targets. The tactical advantage of surprise, achieved through meticulous planning and unbroken supply lines, begins to manifest. 10:20. Bombs are armed, final navigational adjustments made. Pilots check altitude and heading once more. The culmination of weeks of preparation, the invisible coordination of supply chains, and the audacity of long-range planning converge in this moment. From Tokyo to the Pacific, assumptions are about to collide with reality. 10:35, April 18, 1942. The first B-25s approach the outskirts of Tokyo. The skyline is a blur of industrial complexes, warehouses, and port facilities, all seemingly calm under the early morning sun. Pilots grip controls with white-knuckled focus, aware that the element of surprise is their only shield. Japanese anti-aircraft positions have yet to fully register the incursion. Everything rides on precision, timing, and the quiet audacity of the mission. At 10:40, the lead aircraft releases its ordnance. Bombs fall in tight formation, striking factories, warehouses, and shipping depots. Explosions ripple through the city. Smoke begins to rise in thin, dark columns. The second wave follows, each release calculated to maximize impact while maintaining flight stability. Pilots navigate flak, timing their turns and altitudes with minute attention. The sky is punctuated by anti-aircraft fire, but the bombs, meticulously aimed, begin to reach their intended targets. Meanwhile, the Hornet and Enterprise, hundreds of miles offshore, maintain course and speed, engines steady. Radio silence is broken only by essential updates: confirmation of takeoff, formation integrity, and fuel status. Auxiliary vessels trail the fleet, ready to provide support if any bomber is forced to ditch. The invisible supply network, dismissed by Japanese intelligence as non-existent, now underpins operational reality, keeping the fleet and airstrike fully functional. Japanese response is delayed and disorganized. Fighter squadrons scramble too late, forced into interception by pilots who must climb rapidly and navigate unfamiliar airspace. Anti-aircraft batteries, trained for local defense, miscalculate ranges and altitudes, resulting in scattered bursts rather than coordinated fire. Confusion reigns. For the Americans, this is the critical margin. Every second of disarray increases the chance of mission success. 10:55. The final wave of bombers reaches the city center. Ordnance is released with near-perfect timing. Fires spread along industrial zones. Port facilities are damaged, and key warehouses housing fuel and munitions catch alight. Pilots note smoke columns, explosions, and the sudden surge of local emergency response. Visibility is reduced, yet flight patterns are maintained. Fuel carefully monitored to ensure return capacity. Each aircraft now begins the precise calculation for the homeward leg, mindful that any misstep could leave it stranded hundreds of miles from safety. As the bombers turn back toward the fleet, Japanese leadership realizes the scale of the strike. Intelligence reports had dismissed such an operation as impossible. The audacity, coordination, and hidden logistical support of the Americans collide with expectation. Panic ripples through command centers. Messages scramble, and orders are delayed as officers reconcile the reality with prior assumptions. The fleet remains intact offshore, unthreatened by counterattack. The orchestration of supply and timing now a visible force against an unprepared enemy. 11:30. Bombers cross over the ocean, retracing thousands of miles of open water. Fuel consumption is carefully monitored. Engines are checked through intermittent communication with deck crews. Pilots navigate using dead reckoning, sun position, and prior charts. Japanese reconnaissance remains largely unaware, trailing behind, attempting to assess damage too late. The psychological strain on both sides is palpable. Americans focused on survival and mission completion, Japanese commanders reeling from the surprise and magnitude of the strike. By 12:15, all aircraft have successfully returned to the Hornet. Deck crews, already prepared for rapid recovery, begin refueling, rearming, and inspecting each plane. The precision of supply lines, meticulously maintained, allows the fleet to recover and prepare for contingencies. Auxiliary ships ensure that any emergency landings can be mitigated. The operation, which Japanese intelligence assumed impossible, has been executed flawlessly. The immediate consequences ripple beyond the physical destruction. Factories and warehouses are damaged, fires burn unchecked, and local command and control is thrown into chaos. Psychological impact is profound. Japanese officers and civilians alike confront the realization that American forces can strike far from home, sustained by supply networks and meticulous planning. The assumption of invulnerability is shattered. This moment also redefines operational expectations. American logistics, once invisible, dismissed as inadequate by Tokyo, is now proven decisive. Every crate, fuel drum, and calculated mile of ocean demonstrates that preparedness and supply can extend strategic reach beyond what conventional intelligence deems possible. The attack does not alter the course of the war immediately, but it forces a recalibration of Japanese doctrine, strategy, and perception of American capability. As smoke rises over Tokyo and bombers settle back on deck, the Hornet and Enterprise remain in position, engines steady, crews vigilant. The clash between expectation and execution, assumption and reality, has been resolved in favor of planning, coordination, and disciplined logistics. Japanese intelligence, which saw only the limitations, now confronts evidence that U.S. supply lines, invisible, yet formidable, are capable of sustaining operations across the Pacific. The strike ends, but its implications have only begun. The shock reverberates through Tokyo, across intelligence reports, and along the decks of American carriers. Logistics, timing, and audacity have converged to create a moment where history pivots quietly but irreversibly, long before the war's final battles. April 18, 1942. The morning after the strike, Tokyo wakes to smoke rising from industrial districts and port facilities. Fires smolder across warehouses and fuel depots, casting long shadows over streets now strewn with debris. Eyewitness reports confirm what Japanese intelligence had dismissed. Americans struck directly at the heart of the home islands. Casualty figures are limited but notable. While civilian fatalities are relatively low compared to the destruction of material, the psychological impact is immediate and profound. Factories and storage facilities crucial to Japan's war effort are disrupted. Crates of munitions, barrels of fuel, and assembly lines lie damaged or destroyed. Even temporary interruption in production reverberates across the Japanese military machine, slowing delivery schedules and forcing officers to reallocate resources hastily. In addition to material losses, key communication lines are disrupted. Telephone and telegraph systems suffer localized outages, slowing response times and creating confusion in coordinating defensive measures. On the American side, the Hornet and Enterprise return to open ocean largely unscathed. Every bomber makes it back to its carrier, a testament to meticulous planning, rigorous training, and the efficiency of hidden supply lines. Deck crews immediately refuel, rearm, and inspect aircraft. No aircraft are permanently lost to mechanical failure. No major damage occurs to the carriers themselves. Auxiliary ships remain in position, prepared to respond to emergencies, though none are required. Operational readiness is maintained. The immediate strategic effect is twofold. First, Japanese planners are forced to confront an operational reality they had ignored. The United States is capable of projecting force across the Pacific, sustained by supply networks and disciplined coordination. Intelligence reports, previously dismissive, must now be revised. Officers who assumed American fleets were constrained and fragile are confronted with evidence of their misjudgment. Second, the psychological impact on both Japanese civilians and military personnel is considerable. Confidence in the invulnerability of the home islands is shaken. Even minor disruptions to logistics, supply, and production are magnified by the fear that further attacks may follow. American command also experiences repercussions, though of a different sort. The operation proves that long-range planning and precise logistics can achieve strategic surprise. It validates doctrines emphasizing flexibility, improvisation, and redundancy in supply. Officers debrief crews, recording fuel consumption, ordnance performance, and navigational accuracy. Lessons learned here will inform future carrier operations and long-range strikes throughout the Pacific, underscoring the critical importance of supply lines and meticulous preparation. Additionally, the strike forces Japanese forces to reconsider defensive deployment. Anti-aircraft positions are reviewed and reinforced, fighter patrols extended, and early warning systems scrutinized. Resources are diverted from other theaters to prepare for threats previously considered improbable. The psychological burden of preparing for an unexpected strike strains command and stretches already limited material and personnel resources. By nightfall, smoke continues to rise over Tokyo. Fires burn in industrial zones, and the human toll begins to crystallize. Casualties, while not catastrophic numerically, are compounded by the loss of resources, equipment, and morale. Japanese intelligence officers begin to question previous assumptions. Fleet commanders are forced into defensive posturing, stretching already overextended resources. For the Americans, the mission confirms that audacity, preparation, and logistics can offset numerical inferiority and geographic disadvantage. In sum, the immediate aftermath highlights the stark contrast between perception and reality. Japanese intelligence, confident in the limitations of American supply, is forced to confront operational success born not of brute force, but of preparation, coordination, and logistical mastery. American forces, meanwhile, demonstrate that careful planning and disciplined execution can achieve a strategic effect far beyond raw numbers or firepower. The first shock of the strike reverberates across command centers, ports, and cities, marking a pivot in perception, doctrine, and operational planning. In the days following April 18, 1942, the full implications of the raid begin to unfold. Japanese military planners, previously confident in the invulnerability of the home islands, are confronted with a stark reality. American forces are capable of projecting power thousands of miles from their bases, sustained by logistics invisible to distant observers. Intelligence reassessments are hurried, patchy, and cautious. Officers re-examine the assumptions that led to complacency, realizing that operational surprise is no longer a theoretical concern, it is demonstrably achievable. The psychological impact on Japanese command and civilian populations is profound. Confidence in coastal defenses and early warning systems is shaken. The perception that the home islands are untouchable is replaced by a lingering uncertainty. Civilians witness smoke rising from industrial districts previously considered secure. Military officers scramble to reinforce airfields, expand patrols, and redeploy limited resources to counter the threat of further strikes. Every day, Japanese planners must now account for a capability they had once dismissed, a capability sustained not by sheer numbers, but by precise preparation, discipline, and supply. For American forces, the raid establishes a benchmark in operational logistics and carrier-based aviation. Every detail of the mission, from fuel calculations to bomb load, is documented and analyzed. The operation demonstrates that even over vast distances, with seemingly limited resources, strategic objectives can be achieved through meticulous coordination. Lessons learned inform subsequent Pacific campaigns, including carrier strikes in the Solomon Islands and the planning of long-range raids on Japanese-held territories. Logistics, once undervalued in discussions of combat power, becomes recognized as a decisive factor in operational success. The raid also reshapes tactical doctrine. Japanese forces, now aware of American reach, must alter deployment strategies, moving fighter squadrons and anti-aircraft defenses to cover previously secure areas. This dispersal of forces dilutes concentration, forcing adjustments in supply chains, garrison strength, and fleet positioning. The redistribution of defensive assets stretches Japanese logistics thin, revealing vulnerabilities in other regions. In essence, a single audacious operation forces recalibration across multiple theaters of war. Longer term, the attack fuels American morale. After the shock of Pearl Harbor, public perception of vulnerability dominates national consciousness. News of a successful strike on the Japanese home islands proves symbolic as much as strategic. It reassures military planners and the public alike that the United States, despite recent setbacks, can respond with precision and ingenuity. Sailors, pilots, and support crews gain confidence in the effectiveness of training, coordination, and supply chains. This morale boost reinforces discipline and commitment, essential in the grueling campaigns that will follow in the months and years ahead. For Japanese intelligence, The raid exposes weaknesses in observation, assumption, and prediction. Reconnaissance networks, previously relied upon for certainty, are revealed as incomplete. Decision-makers recognize that underestimation of enemy capability can have immediate operational consequences. Commanders must now plan for a wider range of contingencies, balancing the need for offensive operations in Southeast Asia with new requirements for homeland defense. Every misjudgment, previously theoretical, now carries visible consequences. The ripple effects extend to operational logistics across the Pacific. Both sides recognize that supply lines, once invisible in strategic calculations, can determine outcomes. Fuel availability, ordnance allocation, and maintenance readiness become central to planning, with American success providing a blueprint for sustained operations far from home ports. The strike demonstrates that mastery of logistics can overcome apparent geographic limitations, reinforcing the principle that wars are often won as much by planning and preparation as by firepower or numerical superiority. By early May 1942, the first shock has fully registered. Fires have been extinguished, damaged facilities repaired, but the lessons remain. Japanese confidence in uncontested territorial security is irreversibly shaken. American planners, having validated long-range operational concepts, begin preparing for future strikes, building on the foundation of logistics, timing, and audacity. The raid does not win the war, but it shifts perceptions, reshapes doctrine, and proves that careful preparation and hidden supply chains can transform strategic expectations into operational reality. The raid of April 18, 1942, stands not as a monumental battle of numbers or territory, but as a quiet testament to the power of preparation, logistics, and disciplined execution. It illustrates that war is shaped as much by what is unseen as by what is visible, by supply lines, careful calculation, and human endurance as much as by bombs and bullets. In this moment, the United States demonstrated that audacity alone is insufficient. It must be underpinned by meticulous planning, redundancy, and timing. Japanese intelligence had assumed absence where capability existed. They judged the Americans by limitations they perceived, not by the methods the U.S. had developed to overcome them. The raid revealed the flaw in this logic. When preparation meets opportunity, expectations, even those reinforced by doctrine and prior victories, can be shattered. Supply lines, invisible to distant observers, became the instrument of strategic surprise. In the quiet aftermath, it was clear that the ability to sustain operations, to coordinate humans and machines across vast distances, could alter the perception of strength without a single fleet engagement in sight. For the individuals involved, the impact was immediate yet subtle. Sailors and airmen returned exhausted but confident, aware that the success of a mission depended on collective discipline, not personal heroism. For Japanese commanders, the realization was humbling. The vulnerability of assumptions can be as dangerous as the vulnerability of ships or airfields. The raid did not decide the war. It did not cripple Japanese industry or change the strategic balance overnight. But it changed the calculus of perception, the understanding of capability, and the role of logistics in modern warfare. It proved that operations far beyond conventional reach could succeed when every variable is considered, every motion rehearsed, every supply line intact. History, in this instance, pivoted quietly, not with a clash of fleets, but with crates, fuel, and coordination, the invisible machinery of war demonstrating that preparation, precision, and audacity, combined, can redefine what is possible.